Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. This is a public meeting for the draft Highlands community plan. It's the comprehensive plan for the town of Highlands that has been developed over the past 8 months or so. The meeting will have a short presentation at the beginning of the meeting, probably about 25 minutes or so. And that'll take us to about 6:30. And then we'll have some Q&A, questions and answers, and opportunity to ask questions about the plan and the draft recommendations, and provide any comments that you want to. So with that, my name is Jake Petrosky. I work for Stewart, a consultant firm that's helping the town out with this plan. I'm a planner, but also work with a number of different disciplines here at Stewart. We have engineers and landscape architects and a number of other disciplines. And Allison, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Allison Evans. I work with Jake at Stewart. I'm also a planner who's been working on this project for the past 10 months or so.
And we also have Michael Mathis, who is a planner for the town of Highlands as well. If you have questions for him later, he'll field them if needed. So we'll go ahead and get started with a presentation.
So hi everyone, I'll start us off. Thank you for spending your evening with us. We're just going to go over a little introduction to the plan. That's how we'll start tonight. We'll cover what does this plan do, how does it function within the town of Highlands, the schedule for the project, and how we've engaged with the public so far. And then we'll get into the draft vision and goals before getting into the meat of the plan, the draft recommendations that address those areas you see for the town. So if you want to review this draft plan, this is a lot of information all at once. You can head to www.highlandscommunityplan.com. We've posted the draft copy there for people to review. And then once you have reviewed it and you have a comment, or you thought of something after the meeting, you can go head over to the SurveyMonkey site. It contains just an open-ended question for you to let us know what you liked about the plan, what you wanted to see, what you want to include at all. And that is also, a link to that is also available on that top website. So highlandscommunityplan.com is going to get you everywhere you need to be. So as far as the schedule for the project, like we mentioned, we started last summer. We spent the fall and the late summer analyzing the town, learning all we could about it, conducting our public engagement, talking to you all, talking to the community, talking to stakeholders, and over the winter, we wrote this plan. And now we're at the stage where we're getting our final feedback from the public before we take it for adoption this summer. So we're got the end in sight. And again, if at any point during this presentation you have questions or something you want to chat, you can put it into that chat box. We can see and try to answer the question. And then of course we'll have that discussion period at the end. So a comprehensive plan is, it's a guiding policy document for the town. It looks about 10 to 20 years in the future, although, periodic updates throughout that time. But kind of looking at where the town's at now, where does it want to go, and what we can do to get there. So it provides guidance to the town on things like land uses, development intensity, design. It guides how the staff and town boards make decisions on programs and investment. It is collaborative. It documents this community conversation like we're having tonight. And it is policy, not regulatory. So these are groundwork for future and current regulations. Everything you see is the jumping off point for future decisions the town will make. This is not a blanket new set of ordinances for Highlands coming out of this plan right now. So as part of this process, of course, public engagement is very important. We did a lot of this during the fall. Excuse me. We started off by conducting stakeholder interviews with different people, different groups around town. People who work in the town, teachers, people who work with the utilities, hearing, their kind of expert level input on what they're seeing on the ground in Highlands. We also had a public meeting and a virtual public meeting in about late October, early November, where we kind of gathered input on people's visions for the town. We had a walking tour, and of course, throughout this whole month-long process, we've had periodic meetings with our steering committee, who again was a selection of representatives of the community around town, and periodic updates to them, incorporating their feedback on how the plan was shaping up. So again, the stakeholder interviews, we looked at environmental and recreation interests, schools and medicals, development, town staff, economic development, all those kinds of pieces, the real players in the town, what we're seeing. During that public meeting, what we talked about with them and with the stakeholders, these are just a few themes that came up a lot. Of course, a lot was discussed during this time: walkability, protection of natural resources, the recreation. The reason why everyone loves Highlands is protecting those natural resources and getting out and enjoying them. And we also talked about a lot about the role of downtown, especially how parking is a factor in downtown. We learned all sorts of perspectives on that. Some of you may have taken that survey we hosted in the fall. We had over 1,000 responses. It was hosted in English and in Spanish. We had a great response, especially considering the full-time residents of Highlands is about 1,000, but we wanted to hear from everyone who considers themselves a part of the community. So we had full and part-time residents and employees. We had a large percentage of residents or respondents 55 and over, with high earners, and lower in the younger demographic. But you can see those top two bars on that graph are, the top one is live here year round, and the blue one is part-time residents. So those are represented about equally in that survey response. And that was very, very crucial for the recommendations that we came up with. And this, again, just really encapsulates what we've heard from the community so far. When asked, this is responses to a question that asked, what do you value about Highlands? An open-ended question. People value the community, the beauty, the nature, the small town feel, being in the mountains, the environment. So this is really, just a warm, glowing review of everything that people love about Highlands, and what they want to protect and what is at stake as we create this plan. So from those responses and those open-ended and the other data we received, we came up with a vision for the town and vision and goals that will guide this plan. And Jake's going to take us through those now.
So the vision and goals are kind of like an overall guide for where we want to go as a town. The vision statement says Highlands is a vibrant and scenic mountain community founded on the beauty of the plateau's natural environment, the uniqueness of its village character, and the richness of the area's culture and history. So that's something that is kind of like a guiding vision statement. And then the goals, these are kind of components of that vision. These are things that we can make progress toward that really support the type of place we want Highlands to be today and in the future. The first goal is about town character, maintaining and enhancing the town center's village character that's surrounded by mostly low density housing and then blends to the natural environment. Environmental preservation is a big goal. Preserving and enhancing the natural environment and the scenic beauty of Highlands. That scenic beauty is what has created the town, what created the town long ago, and why people come there and why people stay there. The culture and history of the plateau and of Highlands is also really important. So we want to preserve and protect that cultural history and historic resources of Highlands. It's another goal. Then goal number 4 is about pedestrian focus. Create a downtown in commercial areas that emphasize the comfort and safety of pedestrians. That's something that people, regardless of whether they're full-time residents or part-time residents, they all really want to increase pedestrian safety. So we have some recommendations about that. Goal number 5 is about partnerships, cultivating ongoing community partnerships with area organizations and governments to plan for and protect the plateau. The town can't do it all on its own, because what happens outside of the town limits affects Highlands and affects the residents of Highlands. And we'll get into some examples of that partnership and how it can work well as we get into recommendations. And number 6 is the local economy, supporting and sustaining the local economy, including downtown businesses, tourism, the arts, and outdoor recreation. And for each of these, we have some recommendations that are in the plan, and we'll hit the highlights of it in the next section. So into the recommendation section, one key part of this comprehensive plan is a future land use map. And this map and the different colors on the map, the character areas, really are meant to guide land use decisions, infrastructure decisions, and development design in the town limits, the current town limits and future town limits moving forward. It doesn't include some areas outside of the town on this map, but those policies that are in this plan and that sort of thing would only kick in if voluntary annexation occurs outside of the town limits. So that's if a property owner has a piece of land and wants to get town services, they would petition for annexation. That's why we include areas outside the town limits in this, but it would be voluntary, it would not be involuntary. So each of these character areas is kind of talking about what we want to see in that area in the future. And I'll walk through each of these kind of character areas and what kinds of land uses and development design we really want to see moving forward. The outlying areas, you can kind of see 64 snaking up the plateau and then into downtown Highlands and then over west and down into the gorge and to Franklin. You see the low density residential areas in yellow. These are really meant to be low density single family neighborhoods. Then you see a lot of light green on the map. These are conservation design areas where we want very low density residential areas because they have sensitive natural resources, either steep slopes or important habitat or something else that's very sensitive, and we want those natural resources to be preserved. So conservation subdivisions or cluster subdivisions would be encouraged there. So lots of open space in exchange for some flexibility in lot size. The parks and open space areas, those are dark green. You see a lot of dark green really surrounding the study area and even inside the study area. A lot of that is national forest land. And then some other big chunks are conservation areas managed by the Highlands Cashiers Land Trust. So those are really important, and I'm sure you all visit and recreate there often as residents. So another area I'll point out is the pink area. These pink areas are called neighborhood mixed use areas. These are areas where there's already some commercial development and what the plan is recommending around there is there'd be some mix of uses, some commercial or non-residential development, and potentially some mix of housing in these areas, but they're relatively limited in scale. And a lot of them already reflect some areas that have some more commercial uses in it. Then when we get into the downtown area, this is just zooming in on that map. You can see Main Street kind of going left to right. And then 64 coming in from the north. You see the recreation park in green there. There's two main downtown character areas. There's the dark red area, the downtown business district. This is really the heart of downtown. This really centered along Main Street and 4th Street, really. It's the heart of downtown. It has this mountain village character that people come from near and far to experience. We see this as being a lot of mix of uses. So active ground floor, so retail and shops and restaurants on the ground floor. There could be some offices or residential apartments above. And there's a real big emphasis here on the pedestrian experience and pedestrian safety and comfort. Then there's the downtown support area, which is a slightly lighter shade of red or dark pink. And this is an area that's not really on Main Street, but it's surrounding it. So this is meant to kind of support the downtown in different ways. So you could have some hotels here, you could have some more non-residential. Right now there's a mix of office, and there's some residential, and there's some shops, and there's some hotels and Highlands Plaza and that sort of thing. So here we would have some flexibility and allow some slightly larger building footprints, but we still want to maintain the character of downtown Highlands and while allowing some mix of uses and mix of housing options. So I'll talk more about some policy recommendations as we kind of move on here. For land use and housing, we want to maintain the scale of existing development and character of Highlands. So that comes down to height and size of buildings. Right now there's a fairly strict size limit and height limit for downtown, and plan is recommending that continues. The town also encourages certain types of architecture and building materials, high quality building materials in this area, in downtown areas specifically, and I think that probably needs to continue. There's also some historic buildings and neighborhoods that the plan recommends preserving and encouraging the preservation of. And then also each different commercial area, so the downtown business district and the downtown support area and that neighborhood mixed use area has different character, and that is recommended to be reinforced with different things. And the plan gets into more detail about what size of buildings and how the building should be designed, where parking should be placed, and that sort of thing. So another key policy in the land use section is managing growth along major entry corridors and edges. So this gets into the partnership goal. The corridors into Highlands are not necessarily in the town limits. So 64 north of town is in Macon County. So the town can require parking and storage areas and large buildings to be screened from view inside their city limits and town limits. But when it comes to what can happen on 64, encouraging Macon County to establish design standards along 64 and other main corridors is really important, because they're really their planning jurisdiction currently is that area. There's a couple other options that the town could look into, is extending an ETJ up 64 in certain limited circumstances. And then there's also some potential for conserving land on the outskirts as well. And the Highlands Cashier's Land Trust has done some of that. But just to give you an example of why it's important is over on the right picture of these slides. The picture on the top right is a storage business that was built under Highland standards, where there was a previous ETJ. And then the storage unit on the bottom is elsewhere in Macon County, where there's not stringent design standards. So you can see the top one is probably more in keeping with the character of Highlands than the bottom one, and that's something that we'd like to encourage. So there was a lot of talk about preservation of natural resources that came out of our stakeholder meetings, but also there was some mention of a need for housing and different housing types. So policy 4 is about a limited mix of housing types, encouraging those in defined areas of town and different ways you can do that. One is through planned cluster and conservation developments, and those provide flexibility in lot size in exchange for pretty stringent design criteria. So the town currently requires 50% or half of the property to be conserved as open space in planned cluster developments. So this is an example to the right of a recent subdivision that was approved that preserves half of the land, all near Mill Creek, while providing some flexibility in lot size. So you can see that that area along Mill Creek being preserved is good for water quality and also potential recreation space and that sort of thing. So that's a way to preserve natural resources and give some flexibility in the size of and types of housing. Another idea that was preferred during the visual preference survey was pocket neighborhoods. These pocket neighborhoods are single family homes oriented around a shared open space. And we're saying these could only be appropriate in limited areas, but maybe near downtown and other commercial areas, a way to get a different type of single family housing type in town and allow some room for innovative design. A couple other ways to encourage a limited mix of housing is incidental apartments. The town is doing this in business-oriented zoning districts, allowing apartments above retail or commercial. And then also looking at where to allow limited multifamily opportunities that are consistent with the village character of Highlands. The previous land use plan talked about limited multifamily opportunities, and we've identified a few areas where some minor changes to the code will allow for some flexibility there. And then also defining criteria for allowing accessory dwelling units we think is important. Right now, the town doesn't have clear standards there, but this would be, allowing an accessory dwelling unit if you have a property that's over a certain size, and you can do so without impacting negatively your neighbor's property and that sort of thing. So going more into where to allow for multifamily and how to allow for multifamily. Really underutilized commercial properties, really in the B3 zoning district. There's some examples of that, like Highlands Plaza. That is a place where multifamily, like townhomes or small scale apartments or condos with 4 units or something would be appropriate. And how to allow for that would be to provide a little bit more flexibility in terms of minimum acreage for multifamily, and maybe even slightly higher densities. There was a lot of talk about workforce housing or people that work in town or even own businesses in town that can't live close to Highlands because there's just not a lot of housing available. This could be a way to do that. You could allow slightly higher densities if a certain number of units were considered workforce housing, so as an incentive. And that could go to housing for teachers, for police officers, or firefighters, a way to potentially address that concern. Another thing that we talked about in a lot of the steering committee meetings were short-term rentals. And with Airbnb and VRBO, there's more short-term rentals in and around Highlands and in Macon County in general, all over Western North Carolina. They're dealing with it, so we asked people what they thought about it. 62% of survey respondents have concerns about short-term rentals, and then we also asked businesses in a business survey what they thought about rentals and hotels, and 61% of the business survey results agree that more hotels and rentals downtown would help their businesses. So you see some respondents have concerns and some businesses think they might help their businesses. So those are the two kind of inputs that we're looking at. And at the public meeting, that was a big conversation piece, is short-term rentals. In North Carolina, the Vacation Rental Act of 2020 does set some parameters on what the town can do related to regulating short-term rentals. We can't require rentals to register. We can't do a lottery for permits, and we can't levy a special tax just on short-term rentals. So we'd have to do something for commercial and residential properties. So we're looking at this and provided some opportunities and options in the plan for what to do moving forward, because there are some concerns mainly about noise and trash, and parking and that sort of thing related to short-term rentals and the changing character of neighborhoods in some neighborhoods. So we've kind of created a list of options and kind of a first phase and then a second phase of how to proceed. One is, monitor short-term rentals first. I don't know if it's on here, but monitor concerns of short-term rentals and enforce existing ordinance. So noise and trash ordinance, that would be something we would recommend. Continue enforcement, make sure we know where the issues are, how many issues are there not. There's been a handful of documented calls to the police related to short-term rentals, but getting a handle on the issue and documenting it is important. Could do an optional short-term registry or a no-fee permit that would allow you to get a handle on things. Education and outreach to rental owners and emphasizing rules and requirements is something that is kind of a low-hanging fruit. And, the police department has volunteered to help with that education and outreach effort. And the planning department also has a role to play there. Encouraging homeowners associations to regulate short-term rentals is another way to address short-term rentals, and they can, say that you could, only have certain length of stay, or they're not allowed in this neighborhood, or whatever the homeowners would like to do. And then the fifth option is using the zoning ordinance to regulate short-term rentals. And this is something that more discussion is needed in order to determine if and how to implement this, but the town could regulate the location where short-term rentals are allowed, or a minimum length of stay. And then there's also a method where they could differentiate between whether the home is a full-time short-term rental or owned by the owner that lives there full or part-time, and where those different conditions might be allowed. And we can go into more information or more detail about this later, but I kind of want to just touch on the options that are in there right now. Parks and natural resources and recreation are really important. You all are surrounded by public land. There's 107 miles of trout water within 5 miles. There's 36 designated natural heritage natural areas. Those are the most ecologically significant and rare habitats in all of North Carolina. You have 36 just in this study area. There's some counties that have less than 10, right? So this is a very biologically diverse region and really important natural resources. You also have the Highlands Plateau Greenway that is made up of off-road trails and on-road designated routes that is really important to kind of recreating in around town. There's town and county facilities and Founders Park and Recreation Park and the community field, and also the Highlands Recreational Field that's jointly owned by the county, maintained by the town. There's also a lot of public accesses in the National Forest area, and then also the Highlands Cashiers Land Trust that is important here. Supporting those recreation options and outdoor tourism is something that is recommended in the plan. Improvements to Recreation Park are also recommended in the plan. Access improvements to some of those other facilities, and that might be a partnership between the town and other entities. Protecting views and natural resources, and the town can do that through encouraging open space preservation and preservation of natural resources, heritage trees or really large specimen trees during development. And they do some of that, and there's some recommendations to improve those. And protecting the plateau's water quality is also something that was really important that we heard through the process. Preserving riparian areas, those areas near streams, preserving vegetation and trees there, that will maintain water quality. Low impact development, improving the quality of stormwater runoff from development through the use of bioswales and green roofs pervious pavements, that sort of thing. And stormwater is really important with that. And also just looking at stormwater projects that may be needed to reduce the volume of runoff. And there's some suggested projects that were documented by the town and reinforced in the plan, but also how do you pay for those projects? So how do you staff maintaining and reviewing stormwater permits, but also potentially those projects, and there could be a utility fee that's needed to do so. Downtown and tourism is really a key part of town, so maintaining and enhancing that village character, improving pedestrian facilities, including lighting, wayfinding, crossings is really important. I'll go into that a little bit more detail. Managing public parking and studying opportunities for increased on-street and off-street parking. So that's adding on-street parking in some places where we can, looking at additional public lots, surface lots, or potentially even a parking deck down the road. Business survey results, we heard a lot about what they want to see downtown. Improved open spaces, parks and walking trails was important, pedestrian infrastructure improvements, and then parking. Those were the top three there from folks that took the business survey. In the plan, there's a number of specific recommendations for improvements downtown, streetscape improvements on Main Street and potentially Spruce Street and Oak Street, intersection improvements in Red at First and Main and Spring, and then some green space improvements and where those overlap with potential redevelopment opportunities. I can go into that in more detail. Main Street, there's potential to retrofit West Main Street. Right now, you kind of have parking on one side near the businesses, but then there's a kind of a hill and an elevated walkway on the north side, and converting that to on-street parking along there with a little knee wall might add some spaces along that section of Main long term. We also looked at Maple Street and Oak Street, and that area bounded by Maple Street on the north, and Oak Street is actually owned by the town. And looking at some potential improvements along Oak Street, looking at additional surface parking or potentially a parking deck, and then some redevelopment on the fire station site. Maybe even a park or plaza is something that we looked at in this. More conversation is needed on that to figure out what the ideal path forward is for that. We looked at transportation, looking at intersection improvements, managing that existing parking that we do have, looking at future parking and encouraging biking and walking, transit and electric vehicles. And this is just an example of one of the options for Main Street in the plan, a mid-block crossing where pedestrians can cross between 3rd and 4th. But more work would need to be done to look at, if this could be done, if it does need parking spaces, where new parking spaces be located, and would you compensate, that sort of thing. This is just a map of pedestrian facility recommendations. You see in dark red is where existing sidewalks are, and then the dashed red line are where potential new sidewalks are. And then the green is the existing trails, that Highlands Plateau Greenway and trail network. And then so the dashed purple is potentially extensions of that greenway. Looking at water, sewer, and electric, the plan makes some recommendations there. Fire and police and public safety, there's some recommendations there as well. Additional personnel, some new equipment for the police, and also encouraging, continuing and expanding their community policing efforts is something that they had talked about with us wanting to do in the future. So I know that's a lot, and couldn't cover everything, and there's a lot more detail in the plan, but we wanted to kind of provide an overview of things. And then at this time, we'll kind of break and answer questions. So feel free to type any questions you have in the chat window. Or if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand. There could be a there's a way to get to the chat window. If you hover down at the bottom of your screen and click the chat, you can type something in, or there's also a raise hand button down on that black bar. There should be, at least. So at this point, we'll break and see if anybody has any questions or wants to speak, and just raise your hand or say something in the chat, and we can unmute you, and you can ask any questions that you might have or make any comments. So it's like Canty wants to speak.
Hi, I think you can talk now.
Canty, you have to unmute yourself though. We can unmute you on this side, and then you have to unmute.
Perfect.
Canty, can you talk? We can't hear you. So you might want to try to type something in the chat if you have a question or a comment. Looks like she's still muted on her end.
Yeah. You're unmuted.
Okay, you're unmuted. Can you talk now? Okay, Candy, we're having problems. How about Rick? Let's see if we can unmute Rick and see if he can talk.
Can you hear me?
We got Rick.
Okay. You mentioned in your discussion that HOAs can limit and regulate rentals. Can you go into that a little bit as to how a homeowners association might be able to do that? We've had discussions about that here in my subdivision.
Do you want to take that?
Sure. So yeah, there's different ways to do that depending on how rigid you want to get. You know, there's options where you say, you know, nothing shorter than a week. You can also do, you know, regulate it by the length of stay. You can regulate it
Minimum 3 days. Minimum,
yeah, 30 days if you want to.
30 days.
Yeah, if you want to encourage, you know, like a summer renter. There's also options that have been discussed for towns and can likely be applied to homeowners associations where you cannot have your home just for short-term rentals. So that is nice, where it would allow someone who's away for 3 months of the year to make some money off their home, but does not completely restrict the use. So you can get creative with the ways you want to do it. So it's not a blanket thing, and you know, it becomes a huge burden to those people who do use them, but it does, you know, lighten the load and lighten the visibility of short-term rentals.
And each HOA is different. Their covenants or bylaws or whatever are different. You know, sometimes it takes 51% of the owners to vote on something, or sometimes it's 75%. So it kind of depends on how your bylaws are written on how to go about doing it. But Allison kind of outlined some things that you can do as a HOA. So hopefully that's helpful. If that answered your question, Rick, or if you have any other follow-up questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them. Who else wants to chat? Have a question or a comment? Anyone else?
Okay, we got a chat box. If zoning regulations are put in place for short-term rentals, would they apply only to the properties within the town limit or would it? So it would apply only to the properties in the town limit.
Right, and there's the town can only regulate what's in the town limits. So yeah, if they did put some regulations in place for short-term rentals, they could only apply to the town limits. But it doesn't necessarily have to apply to all the town limits either. I mean, they could, just put some regulations for short-term rentals based on certain zoning districts. So, they could have one set of rules and regulations for downtown and commercial areas, and then one set of rules and regulations for more residential areas or different kinds of residential areas. That is something that they could certainly do. Okay, we have another comment from Tommy and Linda Clark. They say, I think short-term rentals are the biggest threat to the goals residents and part-time residents desire. They go on to say, I realize business concerns are different, but don't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. Residents and part-time residents have always kept the businesses alive, and town is getting so busy that these residents will eventually stop going to the town businesses. So, yeah, we don't want to. One of the concerns with short-term rentals is, and this is happening. Short-term rentals issue is happening all over because of new technologies like Airbnb and VRBO, and folks down on the coast and coastal communities are dealing with it, and also mountain communities like Blowing Rock and Asheville, and down at the coast, Wilmington and Charleston and other places. And one of the concerns with short-term rentals is if you have a cute town, everybody wants to be there. If there's no full-time residents or long-time part-time residents, then a place can kind of lose its heart and soul, and it's just made up of part-time visitors, right? And that's a concern because it changes the character of the town. So it's about balance, and I think Highlands has always walked that line between residents and long-time seasonal residents, and then shorter-term visitors. And this is just a new era of having to balance all those interests. Slocum says, clarify what the state says the town can and cannot control. So do you want to?
Yeah, I think you did mention a little bit on that one side. So the state has their Vacation Rental Act that says, towns cannot levy a fee or registration, require registration for short-term rentals that is not required across the board. There are ways around that, such as maybe a business permit. That would be a business permit that the town has to require for all businesses across the town. So, in other towns we see, and I know Blowing Rock is an example of a town that does this, but it's a very legally gray area. We cannot recommend that. I know some people have brought that up as a comparable town, but you cannot apply something just to short-term rentals. The state also, based on the court cases in Wilmington, the state cannot pick and choose. Towns cannot pick and choose who gets to have a short-term rental via a lottery or something like that. We've been doing as much research as there is on this with based on what North Carolina can do. More should come in the next year when there's some rulings made in Wilmington. But until now, they cannot levy fees and they cannot restrict it and pick and choose.
But you can define it as a use in your zoning code, and then regulate that use and say it can happen in these districts or cannot happen in these districts, or it is required a special use permit, so it's harder to get approved for in these districts and not these districts. The other thing that Allison mentioned earlier is there is some indication that the town could segment different types of short-term rentals. One that is just a short-term rental, that it's always a short-term rental, and there's no one that really lives there that is the owner, versus if it's a part-time owner, a part-time resident that happens to rent out their place for a certain period of time during the year. It is only a rental for a smaller, shorter time. So all this is something that could be done through zoning. Slocum mentioned, what about zoning? And that's how the town could do something through zoning. Is define a use, either short-term rentals, treat them as a separate use, a separate land use, and establish where they could be allowed or where they could not be allowed, or that sort of thing. That's kind of the vehicle for doing that. And then Helene says, would you have to grandfather in existing short-term rentals if the ordinance were to change? So, I mean, this brings up the, part of the issue is there's already a good number of short-term rentals in the town. So, if we establish regulations, 10 years ago for short-term rentals, then it would be a lot easier to deal with. But right now, you have short-term rentals in a number of different areas of town. In many neighborhoods, there's existing short-term rentals. So the town would have to figure out, where to draw that line. And if you do exclude short-term rentals from a zoning district, then that would impact people that are using their homes for short-term rentals right now. Some of those could be those, seasonal residents that just rent out their places for a limited amount of time in order to help make use of the property. So that would potentially negatively impact a number of folks. So that would be something that the town would have to weigh in order to move forward on some type of regulation through zoning. And I don't know about grandfathering. I don't know if you could grandfather in.
What happens if the use is not I'll have to check. I think we covered that.
Yeah.
We can check back on that, Helene. I remember you were on the walking tour with us, so thank you for joining us tonight. And Canty's message came through, short-term rentals fly in the face of maintaining the village character. So yeah, we've heard from all sides on this one. People are passionate about it in towns where they are popular.
Yeah, in Canty, that village character that Highlands is built on is that dynamic between seasonal residents that live there for a long time of the year, full-time residents, and then those shorter term visitors, either day trippers or people coming for the weekend or a shorter period of time. And that creates kind of some of that character. You see people every day that and if you don't have those year-round residents, then it could potentially impact the business, but also change the character of town. Right now, I mean, you have a lot of folks that live in the community, that send their kids to school, that are very active in the community. And that would change potentially if you get more and more shorter term visitors that don't have a long-term stake in the future of Highlands. Rick, do you have another comment? Do you have your hand up still, or is it?
Apologize for being muted. I've got another question regarding these sidewalks, and we have several areas reaching out toward the outskirts of town where a lot of full-time residents live. And I'm wondering if you think that by creating sidewalks out into those areas, 28, 106, would reduce traffic in town. In other words, if we could more easily walk to town, our cars wouldn't be there quite as often. Would that be something that you would emphasize?
Yeah, and the plan does recommend that, because you're right. I mean, there's some neighborhoods that if they had a good way, a safe way to walk to town, they probably would do so more often. So yeah, down 64, towards the barbecue restaurant, down 28 towards the country club, up to the north. There's some recommendations in the plan about extending sidewalks or using some kind of greenway or trail that allows people another option to get to town. And that could be walking, that could be biking, but you have to think, every person that can walk or bike to town safely, that's one less parking spot that would be needed, in order to house that person's vehicle. So yeah, I think you're right, that is an important thing that the town should be doing. And one of the other things that's just great about Highlands is, you don't really have the steep slopes that other mountain communities deal with, because you are on a plateau. I mean, you can run around pretty much the whole town limits and not have to go up a significant hill unless you get up on like Bearpin Mountain or one of these other mountains on the outskirts. But the grades are a lot more gentle than a lot of other places in the mountains for walking and biking. So sidewalks or greenways and trails. The other thing that is important is lighting. Is something that, if you walk around downtown, after it gets dark, once you get off on some of the side streets, the lighting stops. And it can deter people from walking, because they know if they don't want to walk home in the dark, that's a thing too. So lighting, even if there is a sidewalk, adding some lighting can really help the walkability, help it feel safer and like you should be walking, that kind of thing. What else? Anybody else have comments or questions they want to submit? All right, well, we got one more slide to talk about the next steps, and then feel free to kind of raise your hand or submit another comment. I think a lot of these we answered live already, so we could note that. But if you can go to the presentation, just go one more. What happens next after this is really during the month of July, we take what we heard at the public meeting 2 weeks ago, and then tonight, and also there is that comment form online that people have submitted some comments on, and we've got a few phone calls that people have talked about some things they would like to see change or added to the plan.
How long will that be?
We're gonna keep that comment form open probably till mid-July, probably till the 15th. And we are going to meet with the steering committee. We're also going to meet with the planning board and start meeting with the town board, town council about the plan, and share with them what the recommendations are in the draft plan, but also what we heard from folks so far, and then make those final edits. And then the adoption process would begin in August. The plan has to go to the planning board first. And then the town council, and there will be a public hearing in August prior to the adoption of the plan. So that's another opportunity for comment. If you wanted to come to that public hearing and voice your support for the plan, or a change that you'd like to see, or something related to that, you can, and feel free to do so. The other thing that I'll just mention is, this plan is a living document. This is meant to kind of guide the town over the next 5 to 10 years. There is an opportunity to amend the plan if something comes up that we didn't foresee, or that sort of thing. There's a good deal of discretion that the town and the town board's council has on identifying priorities based on how we implement pieces of the plan, what's the most important priority. So that's also to come after the adoption. So that's kind of what it looks like moving forward. We really appreciate you all joining us tonight and being involved in the process, and feel free to go on and submit formal comments and review the draft. And if anybody has any other questions or comments, we can leave things open for a few more minutes. Canty asked, are you going to put a time limit on short-term rentals in the plan? We suggest that that's one of the things that the town could do is put a minimum stay on short-term rentals in one or more zoning districts, but we are not going to specify exactly what that needs to be. There needs to be more discussion, probably on probably at the planning board and town council level, to determine what that should be or could be, and whether they want to move forward on something like a time limit. But that is an option that probably needs to be discussed in the future. All right, anything else, folks?
Happy 4th of July to you all too. I'm sure this is the weekend in Highlands from what we've heard.
Yeah, happy 4th of July. You all enjoy the festivities up there. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. We will be posting all of this on the website as well.
Yes, the meeting the recording will be posted on the website. Yeah. All right, thank you all so much.
Thank you.